Okay, class, today we're going to talk about dividing mixed numbers. Okay, in dividing mixed numbers, just like with multiplying, there is only one prerequisite that you have to know how to do. And that is, do you know what is a reciprocal? Okay, it's the only thing we got to know how to do for division. Okay, so let's talk about a reciprocal. What is a reciprocal? A reciprocal is simply 1 over the number. Take, for example, if I gave you 8, its reciprocal is going to be 1 over 8. Technically, what it amounts to is when I take these two numbers and multiply them together, I will get 1 as an answer. And that's how you define a reciprocal. Right? So an example of another one is the reciprocal of 2 is 1/2, 1 over 2. Right? So let's look at, what if I have a fraction? Just to get a reciprocal of a fraction, you just turn it upside down. Take, for example, 3/4. You turn it upside down to 4/3, so its reciprocal is 4/3. However, what you need to do with this, once you flip it, you do need to simplify it. So the true reciprocal of 3/4 is actually 1 1/3, because you have to simplify 4 over 3. Okay? So let's see if we can practice that just a few times. So here's a couple. So we just had this 3/4, but let's try it again. So the reciprocal of 3/4 is actually going to be 4/3. And now these really aren't equals, so I apologize for that. Those don't need to be equals there. They need to be more like arrows, something like that. So if I have 3/4, to find its reciprocal, it is 4/3, and then we simplify that. And that would simplify down to 1 1/3. But what if I had 4 2/5? What if I had a problem like that, a mixed number? Well, in order for us to be able to flip the fraction, you first have to turn this into a fraction. So you do your popcorn method. 5 times 4 gives you 20, plus 2 gives you 22. We write that down. Then you put it back over 5. So this fraction right here is equivalent to this one. So now its reciprocal is actually the flip of this, 5 over 22. So if I were to take this fraction and this fraction, multiply those together, I would get 1 as an answer. Okay, now what about 7? Well, 7 as a fraction would be 7 over 1, so its reciprocal then would be 1 over 7. And that's really all you need to know in order to divide fractions and mixed numbers. Okay, so now yesterday we learned the multiplication wrap. So today, let's learn the division wrap. Well, the division wrap says, to divide fractions, don't ask why, just flip the second and multiply. So that's the division one. Now, this is really verse 1 of our wrap, because if you put the whole thing together, it looks kind of like this. Okay, the fraction wrap is, to divide fractions, don't ask why, just flip the second and multiply. To multiply fractions, you know you've got them. It's top times top and bottom times bottom. And that's how you divide mixed numbers. Okay, fractions and mixed numbers. But again, you'll notice that in this problem, there is a conditional line still. To divide fractions, you must have fractions before we can do anything else. So let's see if we can do a couple questions. So here's our first one. 5/8 divided by 4/7. Okay, so what we've got to do is do what the wrap says. The wrap says to divide fractions. Don't ask why, just flip the second and multiply. So this flipping of the second, okay, that is called a reciprocal, just like we just talked about just a few moments ago earlier in the lesson. So we're going to take this one. We're going to leave this first one alone, 5 over 8. We're going to take this second fraction and we're going to flip it upside down. Okay, right now it's 4 over 7, so we're going to flip it to 7 over 4. And then I'm going to change it to multiply, because it says to divide fractions. Don't ask why, because I might have to tell you. Just flip the second, or find its reciprocal, and multiply. Now, once it's multiply, you can simplify. You cannot simplify in division. Okay, so in this one right here, we ask ourselves, are there any numbers on top and on bottom that could simplify? And there isn't. Okay, don't be tempted with this 8 and the 4, because they're both on the bottom. Okay, that's like, if you remember from yesterday when we talked about that, that's like coming to school with 2 pair of pants on and no shirt. Okay, you can only simplify a top with a bottom. So in this one right here then, all we can do is multiply. So to multiply fractions, you know you got them. It's top times top and bottom times bottom. and then of course we simplify. So this one right here, we get 35 over 32. It's improper. So we simplify that with division. How many times does 32 go into 35? One time. How many is left over when I take out that 32 out of the 35? 3 over 32. And that would be my final answer. Okay. Let's try another one. What if I have two mixed numbers? Well, if I have two mixed numbers, the first thing we have to do, if you remember back to what the rule says, to divide fractions, you must have fractions. So we got to get fractions first before I can do anything. So we do the popcorn method. 3 times 5 is 15, plus 1 is 16. We write it down over 3. Right? Then this one right here, do the same thing. 5 times 3 is 15, plus 1 is 16 over 5. Now right now this problem is still division. So we now have fractions to divide fractions. I've got the fractions. So now I'm ready to do the rest of it. Don't ask why. Flip the second and multiply. So we keep the first one the same, 16 over 3. We take the second one, we flip it over, and then we change it to multiply. So this is the problem now that we do. Now if you remember from yesterday, the simplifying, if you have a number on top and a number on bottom that have common factors, you can simplify. So this 16 and this 16 right here, they have a 16 in common. So I can divide them both by 16. So this 16 turns into a 1. This 16 turns into a 1. So now on top I have 1 times 5 to give me 5. I have 3 times 1 on bottom to give me a 3. Okay, and then we simplify that using top in, bottom out, or division. How many times does 3 go into 5? It goes 1 time. When I take the 3 out of the 5, what do I have left over? I have 2 over 3 left over. Okay, simple as that. Let's try another one. Okay, so this one here, we've got a whole number that we're dealing with. So the 14, if you remember from yesterday, to change this into a fraction, all I have to do is put it over 1. So we've got 14 over 1 for our first one. Now this one over here, we've got to change this one. Now on this particular problem, I'm going to show you what I really do. Because in the last one, you'll notice we rewrote it as a division problem, as fractions, and then we flipped it, okay, to turn it into a multiply problem. Well, what I like to do is I like to kind of put those two steps together. So I'm going to take this one and I'm going to do 6 times 5 is 30, plus 5 is 35. Well, that's typically on top, but because I'm doing a reciprocal, where's it going to go? It's going to go on bottom. So 35 will go on the bottom, and then the 6 normally goes on the bottom, so it now goes on the top. And then I change it to multiply. So you can change it into a fraction and flip it all at the same time. So now, we try to find out, is there anything that these numbers have in common? Well, this one's a little bit tougher to see, but yes, the 14 and the 35, they have a 7 in common. So I can divide this 14 by 7. I can divide this 35 by 7. Okay, so 14 divided by 7 gives me 2. 35 divided by 7 gives me 5. So now the numbers that I have a 2 and a 6. I'm going to multiply together to get 12. And then a 1 and a 5 to multiply together to get 5. And now we simplify this. 5 goes into 12 2 times. Okay, 2 times 5 gives us 10. So when I pull the 10 out of the 12, I've got 2 left over, and 5 is still on the bottom. So 2 and 2/5 is my final answer. Now there's really only one way I can make this any more difficult, and that's if I throw in some negatives. This is where we remember in multiply and divide. If I have one negative, my answer is going to be a negative answer. Okay? But then everything else is going to be exactly the same. So this one, we turn this one into a fraction. 4 times 5 is 20, plus 1 is 21 over 4. And this is, of course, negative. Okay? And now this 5/8, it's already a fraction, so I don't have to do anything to it. All I have to do is to divide fractions. Don't ask why. Flip the second. So this becomes 8 over 5 and multiply. Now, we ask ourselves, is there anything that these numbers have in common on top and on bottom? Okay? The 8 and the 4, they share a 4 as a common factor. So I take the 8, I divide it by 4 and get a 2. Take the 4, divide it by 4 and get a 1. So now when I multiply across, you get 21 times 2, which is going to give me 42. And I got 1 times 5, which gives me 5. Okay, so now we've got to simplify this. How many times does 5 go into 42? It's 8 times with 2 left over. Now, we got to remember, okay, this is not our final answer because one of the numbers was negative. So that means my answer is going to be negative 8 2/5. And that's how you divide mixed numbers. So one more time, let's go through the wrap. To divide fractions, don't ask why. Just flip the second and multiply. To multiply fractions, you know you got them. It's top times top and bottom times bottom. And that's how we kind of remember the rules for multiplying fractions and mixed numbers.